Hi, it's Jo here from Jo's Country Junction, and I am trying to tackle some of my scraps today. I had a huge bin of scraps, and it's just time for them to get cut down into usable pieces that I can use. I use Bonnie Hunter's scrap user system, and you can find more about that on her website, quiltville.com. But I'll explain a little bit as to what I do with it. That's probably a little bit different than what she does. And then I just thought I'd just chat with you, and I'll just cut up my scraps, and maybe you can grab a project and either sew or cut up your scraps with me. We're here in my kitchen. My kitchen island is right here. It's made from an antique baker's cabinet on that end of it, and this end of it is a big butcher block. And my husband worked to get them to be the same height, so I have the two pieces butt to butt, and that makes up my kitchen island. And I love cutting at my kitchen island. It's the right height. I often have a project here that I'm cutting out. I kind of do things a little bit different, like my stove's over here. I'll be cooking and boiling some noodles on the stove, and there's nothing else to do. So I'll just quick cut a few pieces out of a quilt that I'm making, or do something like that. And so oftentimes my kitchen island has fabric on it, and that's my true admission, my confession. My house isn't always the neatest one in the world. It's not dirty, but it's always a very lived-in house. And part of that is that I have a project sitting oftentimes on my island, or sometimes it's hiding just around the corner in my laundry room, which is right there. And I'll have a project sitting on my island. And right now, my foster dog, Izzy, who is going to be my dog, is in the living room chewing on something. So I have to go see what it is. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Nothing serious. It was just a tag. And the tag happens to say making believe. I have no idea where the tag came from. It must have been something from one of my daughter's bags when they were here, because I do not recognize it. But so far, Izzy's doing pretty good. She's a little Aussie doodle dog, and I really like having her here. And she's actually going from foster dog to being my foster fail, or my permanent dog. And I'm excited to have her. But back to what I originally started to talk to you about, the scraps. You can see if all these scraps were in one bucket, it'd be an overflowing bucket. And that's exactly what I had. I've already been cutting up some of my scraps, and I kind of cut in a little bit different ways. I cut pieces into, here, I'm making a mess, 1.5 inch strips. I cut, and I have a pile of them already cut over here. I have a pile of 2-inch strips, and I have a pile of 2.5 inch strips over here. And that's mostly what I cut, but I do cut a few 3.5 inch strips. I don't use 3.5 as often, so I don't cut as many of those. The main size that I use the most is probably 2 inch, and then probably 2.5 inch, and then 1.5 inch. And those are the size of strips that I cut. A lot of people want to know, why do I bother and take the time to do it? The main reason is I love scrappy quilts. Scrappy quilts are absolutely my favorite. I love looking at them and thinking, oh, I remember I got that fabric when I was here. Or, oh, I remember Kelly and I went shopping and we picked up this fabric when we were at this quilt store. Or, oh, this is one of those pieces that a blog reader gave me. Oh, I just love having it. And I get really nostalgic about different fabrics that are in a quilt. I know it's kind of weird. And beyond that, I just love the mix of colors and the motion that a scrappy quilt gets when there's lots of different colors and hues and shades and pieces into it. And so I purposely cut quilts so that I will be able to have a scrappy quilt. And I purposely pick quilts that are scrappy to make because they're my favorite. And so if I get a pattern and the pattern wants 2-inch pieces, or, like maybe a 2x4 inch piece, I just grab my 2-inch bucket and I just sort the colors I want, and I start cutting. And it's a lot easier than going to a cupboard and starting to pull out fat quarters, and then having to cut a piece off a fat quarter, and then cut another piece off a fat quarter, and then have to refold all those fat quarters and put all those fat quarters away. So a lot of people ask me, how do you make quilts so fast? One of the reasons is I take the time to cut the strips and put them in the buckets, so I have the strips already pre-cut. And so that saves me from having to first pull out those fat quarters and then refold them and then put them away. So my time is spent more sewing and less pulling and digging and organizing and refolding. And that's what my preference is. I took the scraps that I had and I sorted them into piles. Over here, this is mostly like Civil War prints or dark colored prints, jewel tone prints. They're over here. This is my batik fabrics, and this is my bright colored fabrics, along with more white colored neutrals. And I cut up each individual pile at a time because I have one scrap user system that has the 1.5, the 2, the 2.5, and the 3.5. And I have another system of that for batiks, and I have yet another system of that for brights, because typically I don't mix all of those genres of fabrics together. I usually just use the Civil War prints only with Civil War prints. I only use bright prints with bright prints. I do fluctuate with batiks, but oftentimes I just use batiks only in a batik quilt. But if I keep the batiks separate, because some batiks go towards, you know, they're darker or go towards like Civil War or reproduction prints, and some batiks can go this way. So when I'm getting ready to make a quilt, I might go pull a batik bucket and pull out a few that would go this way or pull out a few that would go that way. But in general, they're my smallest system, and they are the ones, the batiks are the ones that I don't use quite as often. So I'm going to show you how I cut my strips, and in order to do that, I'm going to move these out of the way. And I'm just in my kitchen, and they're just going over on the counter. And so I'll put these under here, under the camera, so they're out of the way. Oops, there's another piece that goes actually this way. And now I have my pile. This is my pile that I'm cutting up today that's going to go into the reproduction print bucket. And I might find one or two in there that end up not. So what I usually do is, okay, I have this piece, and I'm going to lay it out, fold it in half, line up the edge. I'm going to grab, oh, this is wider. So I'm going to take this, here's maybe some leftovers from a fat eighth. A lot of times I have blog readers that send me fabrics. First off, for this one being, it's got a nice selvage on it. I'm going to just cut and rip that selvage off. I personally don't do selvage projects, but I know a lot of people that do, and I have a couple friends that do, so that, or blog readers that do, and I send my selvages to them. So I have a big wider piece down on the bottom, and then I have another wider piece here. You can see they're not the same width. This one's a little bit narrower than this one. And then, oh, here I have another blue strip, and this one's even narrower yet, but I'm folding that in half. All of these have a very nice straight edge on them already, but I'm going to just take my ruler, and I usually use a 12-inch ruler for this. It's my favorite size, and I'm just going to square this up. There's really not much to square but there's a lot of like little futsies, and I'm just going to throw those in a pile there, along with the tag that Izzy was chewing on. Okay, my narrowest one on the top, I'm looking, and it's 5 inches wide. So I could do different things with that. I could do a 2-inch piece and a 2-inch piece, or I could do a 2.5-inch piece and a 2-inch piece, and that's probably what I'm gonna do. So I'm just sliding my ruler over to the 2.5-inch size, and I'm cutting that. And I have a pile right over here of other 2.5-inch strips. And I'm going to see if that was indeed wide enough. I'm actually going to cut 2.5 inches off here. And I have them layered up. And so now I have these pieces, and they're going into my 2.5-inch pile, and they'll be there and ready to use the next time I want to make a quilt. Now I'm measuring here again, and boy, it looks like I could get one more 2.5-inch piece off here. So that's what I'm going to do. And sometimes if I know that I'm going to be making a quilt, and I know that, okay, so right now I have a piece a little bit wider than 1.5 inches. So I'm going to cut that piece right here like this and drop that. And then this is going to go over into my 1.5 inch pile. And then I keep redoing that. You know, I have a piece here. I usually try to put a wider piece on the bottom, and I just layer it up with a few more pieces. And then I just keep kind of cutting as I go and layering up as I go. And so right now I have 3 fabrics on there, and all of them are folded at least once. And so I'm just gonna square up the side. Oh, that was a poor cut. I think the ruler moved just a little bit. That happens. Okay, put those there. And this is about 5 inches again. So it looks like we're gonna go with 2.5 inch strips. That's my bucket that probably has the least in right now, because I've done a couple projects, and those couple projects have used up a lot of my scraps. And I also made Bonnie Hunter's Bitcoin quilt, and that one used up quite a bit of my 1.5 inch strips. So now I have a little piece here, and it's only this wide. So I'm just gonna take and measure, and it is smaller than 1.5 inches, but it's wider than 1 inch. So I have a pile that is also right here, and that's just a pile of little bitty crumb pieces. You know, there's a piece here like this. There's a end cut that's kind of wonky because at some places it's really narrow, other places it's wide. That's gonna go into my scrap bucket, and I'll just use that up another time and when I make a crumb quilt. A lot of scraps are pieces that are sent to me by blog readers, because blog readers know that I like scraps and that I do these kind of things. And so I appreciate getting those, and I definitely use all of those in quilts. This one happened to be from the True Blue quilt I just finished making. I live in Northeast Iowa, and I'd tell you the date. Let me see if I can look and see. I think it's the 22nd today. And I've got a piece on top here that's narrow, so I'm gonna do a 2 inch piece. Nope, that goes in this bucket. And another 2 inch piece. Okay, then I'm gonna remeasure because my top piece is used up. So I'm gonna remeasure the bottom piece, and it's not quite 5 inches. So we're gonna go with a 2 inch piece, and then I'm gonna cut a 2.5 inch piece. So it's really just a matter of doing some simple math in your head to decide what size, because I get a lot of people that say, oh, I'd love to do that, but I just don't know what size to cut them. And my philosophy is that if I'm not cutting for a specific project, okay, now here I just had just over 3.5 inches left. I could have cut a 2 inch piece and a 1.5 inch piece, but this time I decided to just cut a 3.5 inch piece. And so I have that, and I'm gonna start a new pile for those because I don't have any of those yet. And then sometimes I'll just get a piece like this, and we're just gonna have to measure it. It's got a bad cut on the other side, so we're just gonna see what it is. And it looks like I can just straighten the cut, and it's gonna be a 2.5 inch piece. And I get some little pieces like this that look like this was probably given to me by a blog reader, and it's already cut at 1.5 inches, and I just measured it. I can see that it's straight along the sides, and so that's just gonna go right into the 1.5 inch bucket. But as I was saying, blog readers know that I love to make scrappy quilts, so they oftentimes send me scraps from their leftover projects because they do not like. Some of these narrower ones, I can't say that word, are easier just to deal with on their own singly. Or I get some pieces like this that are, I don't know, kind of chopped up funny. I know this was a piece from me, and I usually try to cut these as I use them, but this is from a backing of a quilt, and I have a long arm, and so a lot of times I end up trimming the quilt, and there's a little extra backing fabric, and so I'll just give that a little cut. This looks like it's about 3.5 inches. This time I'm gonna cut a 2-inch piece, and then I'm gonna cut an 1.5 inch piece. Because as I said, I don't use a ton of 3.5 inch pieces. There's really a lot of this. That's why I remember using this as a backing. So I'm just putzing away, getting it all cleaned up. Here's another piece of it. Typically, I try to take care of some of these as I go. If I finish a quilt, I try to cut these up into strips right away, but apparently on this day I didn't do that, and it just got thrown in my scrap bucket instead. Admittedly, this is not one of my favorite jobs to do. I don't know if it's a favorite job of anyone who does this, but I do appreciate the work in the end. And as I said, it's something easy I can do while I'm waiting for the clothes dryer to get done or waiting for the water to boil on the stove. I'm just gonna get a quick cut, I think. 2.5 inch. A lot of people, I think, don't tackle their scraps like this because A, they don't have a system, or B, they're afraid to cut their pieces the wrong size. And there really is, you really can't cut them the wrong size. Because if you make scrappy quilts, you're eventually going to use the piece. So I've got some odd pieces that they're just a little bit bigger than 2 inches, but they're not 2.5 inches. I'm stacking those up. And I'm going to make just one cut of them. I'm looking at this one and think it'd be so pretty in a fall quilt. It's a really pretty dark orange color. I don't know if that shows up for you as orange or not. Okay, I've got a stack here that they're all Civil War prints. I was told that I'm not really supposed to call them Civil War prints. I'm supposed to call them reproduction prints because they are reproducing other fabrics besides just Civil War prints. Somehow I end up still accidentally calling them, Civil War prints, and now I have the hiccups. Isn't that great? Okay, this one's already 3.5 inches, so, that's the one I already cut. I put it here and didn't realize that was one that I had cut. You were probably all sitting there yelling at me, "Joe, you already cut that one." So I'm just kind of stacking a little bit. Oh, this is an odd piece. Maybe we'll tackle these odd pieces. I think I have got 2 of these. These came from my blog reader friend, Isla. I'm gonna take this selvage off so I can share that with a friend. Okay, I think that's gonna get just cut off this triangle corner at the end. I'm just gonna cut that off. I'm gonna move my ruler over. Someday I'll have to do this, and I'll have to do, maybe like when I tackle my batik stack, I'll turn my camera and do it in the demonstration mode. And so you can see a little bit about how I do it from that direction. Because right now I know you can see what I'm doing, but probably not seeing quite as well as you'd like to. And then I'm getting down to that these pieces are just odd and wonky. I could cut those and put them in my crumb bucket, but I'm just gonna toss them. Same with that one. Okay, this was a backing of a quilt too. I remember making this quilt, using that for a backing. That's already cut at 1.5 inches. So that goes here. Here's a kind of a wonky piece. I'm gonna see if I can get 1.5 inch strip off that one. This was a piece I got from the thrift store, and I used it as a backing on one of the quilts I made. So it's kind of fun to look at my pieces and know. I actually think it was from quilts I made of Crazy Moms, I think. I don't know for sure. But there's an 1.5 inch piece that I'll use again in another quilt at some point in time. There's another one of these from that other quilt backing. That's going to be a 2.5 inch strip. I do some of that stacking up method, and I do just handle some pieces one at a time. Okay, so here's something that's kind of awkward to handle. This is from the double wedding ring quilt I made. I quilted it, and this is the backing. And so I'm kind of looking to see what I can do with that. I'm evening up the one side edge, and then we'll see what we can get out of it. I buy very, very little fabric from the fabric shop, or the quilt shop. I order a little bit online, but I really don't buy much fabric at all. I'm not, I like to use what I have. I got 1.5 inch strip off there. And I think I can get another little piece. We'll see. I'm gonna throw this much away because there's just nothing of good use on there for me. Maybe somebody else that makes smaller things might get some use, but I don't think I will. I think I'm gonna be able to sneak, yes, I was able to sneak another 1.5 inch piece off there. Here's another piece from that double wedding ring quilt. I'm going to be able to snag a 2.5 inch piece. A lot of the fabric that I buy is from a thrift store. This is just a little piece that's too narrow, but it's still big enough that I'm going to throw in my crumb bucket box. Got a piece here to check. And that one looks to be 2 inches already. And another piece to check. Oh, this one's a little bit wider than 1.5 inches. But I buy a lot of fabric at the thrift store, and sometimes people don't understand how I can do that and still make a good quilt. The thing is that I have a lot of fabric that's stashed, and I only need some more fabric to go with it. And so it's okay if I buy it at the thrift store and work with what I have. Okay, this is a big, long piece. Oh, this was a binding strip, I think. I'm gonna see how wide this is. Okay, this is 2 1/4 inches, and it was cut as a binding strip and is already sewn together. I'm gonna leave that as is, and I have a separate bucket for 2 1/4 inch pieces that are leftover binding strips that I'll use if I'm gonna make a scrappy binding. So that's gonna go over there. But if I buy stuff from the thrift store and I buy over time, I can get enough fabric to do a lot of the projects I need. And I have a lot of blog readers that send me just pieces that they're not interested in anymore. I have a friend, Isla, and Isla sends me a lot of her scraps. And this one I'm not even gonna use a ruler with. I'm just gonna eyeball this and kind of trim it up a little bit. And this is too narrow. I can see that already to go into my scrap user system. So this is just gonna go in the crumb bucket. Okay, I have a bigger piece here. This is left over as a quilt backing. I must have did something else with it too, because it's got some odd cuts on it. But it's time to get it cut up and into the scrap user system. Actually, I think I might, well, no, I can leave this one here. I was thinking about putting it into the brights color bucket because it is kind of bright, but we'll just leave it here. I'm gonna do a stack up one again because I like to do that when I have a longer or a wider piece at the bottom. I'll stack those up. See, I can even put little pieces like this on there when I'm doing that. That's just what I'm gonna do because they'll get cut up with the rest of it. And this is kind of a random piece, a random on top. So I had told you earlier, the size I use the most is 2-inch. And so I'm gonna cut these into 2-inch pieces. I've been making a hourglass quilt that's scrappy. I had a blog reader send me some pieces, and oh, that's a dog toy. Can you hear the clicking in the background? That's Izzy again. She's playing with the dog toy, so that's okay. This piece wasn't quite wide enough to make the cut for the 2-inch, so it's getting cut down. Oh, it's not quite right. Oh no. It's kind of flipping over on me. Okay, there. Now it's better. But as long as I'm making scrappy quilts, a lot of times anything goes. Even if it's not your favorite print, it's okay. It's okay. One time I was talking to Mary Etherington from Country Threads, and Mary said that her partner Connie, her philosophy was you always had to have some pretty fabrics in a quilt and some ugly fabrics in a quilt, because the ugly fabrics make the pretty fabrics shine. And I totally agree with that. And so I do try to put some ugly fabrics, and sometimes those ugly fabrics are maybe something that I did get at the thrift store that, you know, maybe seem a little dated. It's totally okay to still use those. Just pair them up with some pretty current fabrics that came from the quilt shop or your stash, and that way you get a more variety, and those ugly fabrics do make the pretty fabrics shine. So I'm back to cutting a 2.5-inch piece off first. Well, actually that was a 2-inch. Now I'm gonna do the 2.5. I was thinking ahead a little bit. And there are so many quilt books out nowadays that are made specifically for people who are making scrappy quilts. So if you're not a scrappy quilt maker, you could probably grab a quilt book and be a scrappy quilt maker in no time. The first time when I started doing this, it was very overwhelming. So if you've never cut up strips like this and you have like a laundry basket full of scraps that need to be cut up, you are totally right. It is completely and totally overwhelming and annoying and not fun. It gets tedious, but in the end, I just feel like it's so totally worth it. I'm getting a stack going again. These came from Julie of Me and My Stitches. She sent me a scrap bucket of Civil War prints she wasn't using. All the pieces were, you know, like this size and this size. I'll totally use those up and put those in a quilt. I think when I started quilting, I probably paid like, I don't know, $6 or $7 a yard for fabric. And nowadays when I go buy, if I have to buy fabric in town, it almost kills me because I'm so used to not paying that high of prices, because most of the fabric I get is either gifted to me or is from the thrift store. And I'm really lucky. I can fairly regularly find something at the thrift store. Not all the time, but I do. I recently got a good haul that I'm going to be blogging about soon from Goodwill. Normally our Goodwill doesn't have a lot of fabric, but I happened to be there one day when I was taking my dog to the vet, or the foster dog, that's gonna be my dog, to the vet. And I stopped there on my way back and forth picking her up, and I was able to get 4 bags of fabric, and I'm gonna write about it in a blog post, and it was like an awesome haul. I think for $3 I have an almost finished applique quilt, and so I'm super excited about that. And I still have the hiccups. And that same day I stopped at the other thrift store in town, and I was able to get some scrap bags of fabric that I'll be going through pretty soon. But I first have to get this done because this has been nagging at me to do for a long time, and I have just not gotten it done. And it's time. That bucket's been sitting in my sewing room, and then I moved down here, and I said earlier that my laundry room is right over this way. It's just off my kitchen, which is awesome because I can hear the washer or dryer when it's finished, and then I can change it right away or fold it right away before the clothes get wrinkly in the dryer. I love that. But I have this nasty habit of bringing something down from upstairs in the sewing room and thinking that I'm going to get to it in a day or two in between cooking and doing the other things that I have going on. And then it sits there and sits there and sits there, and I don't get to it. And that's exactly what happened with this pile of quilts, or quilt scraps. I sat it there and then it just sat. And so now is the time for me to actually get it done. Okay, that one is not 2 inches, so it needs to be trimmed down. I'll lay this one right on top. That edge is already straight, so all I have to do is square up the other side. I think that shifted a little bit up there. Yes, it did. I'm getting closer and closer to the end of my stack, which is awesome. Okay, I'm gonna layer these up. I've got some green that looks like grass. I've got a light blue. Got another green. Okay, square that side up. This is going much quicker than I thought it would. When I'm doing this regularly, I get sidetracked and do something else, or check my phone, or do something like that. So I'm sidetracked and then I don't stick to it. But this is awesome that I did this with you today, because this is making me stay right here and getting this done. And I'm not wandering around doing other things when I should be doing this. Although I do have a lot of things to do today. I'm trying to get outside yet today and get some tulips planted. This is an odd piece, but we'll make use of that. I'm just layering some things up again. Sometimes even these things can be layered up. Odd pieces. Oh, that one's gonna have to get trimmed. We'll just go with this many. Square up the side. There. Okay, I was able to get a 2-inch piece off there, but now I've got this odd thing like this. I'm just gonna lob that triangle part off and go like this and put that in my scrap bucket. More 2-inch pieces. I'm gonna have to dig around and find some good scrappy quilt patterns, or come up with something that sounds fun for me to sew, because I'm gonna have lots of scraps to use up. And I love having scraps. So if it comes time for me to make a quilt, what I typically do is I'll go in my scrap bucket, I'll pick out, let's say I'm making a blue and red quilt. I will first go to my scrap bucket and I'll look to see what I have. And depending on what I have, I will pull out all of my red and blue scraps from that bucket, and then I'll cut what I can. And then if I can't cut anymore, then I will go to my fat quarters. Just a second, I think Izzy's got something again. Okay, I'm back. She was actually okay. It was a dog toy, but I didn't realize it was a dog toy. So I have another piece of that backing fabric I had from my double wedding ring quilt. You can see that it has the curves on the edge. So I'll cut this one up first. The dogs are trying to let me know that it's time for them to eat. So if you hear them in the background pattering their feet around me and running over that way, they are trying to alert me to understand it's time for them to eat. But we'll do that. I'll take care of that after I'm done cutting this up, because I am so determined to cut this up and get this finished. Izzy, I guess you're seeing what a true day in the life is here with a 6-month-old pup. She went to the vet and had a spay on Thursday. This is Sunday that I'm filming this on, and they were telling me about how she's going to be pretty sore and to try to keep her be pretty low-key, and that has been quite the task. She is quite the little energetic dog. So far she hasn't had to have a cone because she hasn't been licking too much, which I appreciate that. Okay, that one's already 2.5 inches. Boy, we're getting this pile narrowed down, which is awesome. I've been online and I've seen that several people are planning or thinking about doing quilt-alongs, and I am just trying so hard not to join any of them because I have UFOs that I've been really concentrating on this year, and I've actually been doing a pretty good job of it. And so I'd like to stick with that and get my UFOs finished, or at least more of them done along the way. My family life has been super busy, and so that has left me with not as much sewing time as I usually get. So I don't dare join any, but I know I saw that Lori Holt has one. I saw that Connie from Country Threads is doing one, and it's just so hard to not do them. I might cave and do one of them anyway, but we'll just see. Sometimes doing a quilt along is good for me because it actually keeps me a little bit accountable, and I try a little harder to get into the sewing room when I have something like that going on. Okay, this is an odd piece because you can see up here and down here, it kind of gets wavy. So for something like that, I'm just gonna cut it in half. And I'm gonna deal with this part first. And then I'm only dealing with a little bit of wave. And I'm trimming this part up so that this section is gonna be 1.5 inches. I'll put that in my 1.5 inch pile. And this part is probably gonna be 2 inches. We'll see what I can get out of it. It was just a wonky cut. I think it was like somebody was probably straightening up their fabric, and that's just the end of the fabric as they were straightening it. Whoops. I don't have mine over quite straight. I have a green mat, and sometimes if I'm trimming certain colors on it, it's hard for me to see. So there's ended up being a 2-inch strip that can go into that. Here's just a little odd piece, another odd piece. I'm just gonna square these up. It doesn't even matter what size they are. They're going directly into the crumb pile. This is going to the crumb pile. This is going to the crumb pile. Okay, this is gonna get squared up. So this is 2 pieces that I think I'm just gonna throw them in the crumb pile as well. It doesn't matter if you're a crumb or if they're a crumb, what size they are, I just throw them in there. Here's another one. I appreciate you all putting up with me and hanging out while I get this all trimmed up. I really hope it might inspire some of you to try making more scrappy quilts or come up with a scrap user system. When we previously lived in the farmhouse, I had a ton of scraps and I would just put them in a barrel and I would never get to them. I would be wanting to make a scrappy quilt, and in order to make the scrappy quilt, I had to dump out this basket that was the size of a laundry basket, and then I would have to dig and sort through it to find the pieces, the colors that I wanted. Then I would have to take those colors and I would have to trim them up, and then the leftover pieces of that would inevitably get thrown back into the barrel, and I wouldn't use them because it was too much work. It was just too much work to dump that all out and set that on the floor and sort all that out and find the pieces I wanted and then clean it all back up again. And so I never ended up using those scraps. And now, since I switched to this, I use the scraps all of the time. The scraps, like if there's a fire in my house, I would probably grab my scrap buckets before I grab the actual yardage, because these to me make making a quilt, if that makes sense, so much easier for me. And you can see that, yes, it does take some time, but like if you sit down and concentrate on it, it really doesn't take that long to turn a little pile of leftover pieces into usable pieces for a quilt. And so it looks like I'm getting down there. This one's too narrow, so that can go in the crumb bucket. And now I have leftover pieces from a quilt again. These, they don't have a lot, and there's a selvage on the end. They're going straight into the scrap bucket. I'm gonna just trim a piece of this off. This is pretty narrow. That's going into the scrap bucket. Or the scrap bucket and the crumb bucket are kind of two words I use interchangeably. Here's another piece that's going there. I'm gonna see if I can get an 1.5 inch piece off of this. I remember buying this piece from, we had a store just across, just a little ways up. I live in Iowa, so just a little ways into Minnesota in Spring Valley, they had a store called Elko, and the Elko store used to get flat fold fabric in, and so I bought a lot of Civil War fabric from them. It was only like $3.99 a yard, and so I would get a lot of it. And occasionally, while I'm sewing, I'll still find a piece that I bought there. I just love going there because it was so fun. You know, pretty much anything that I wanted, I could afford, and it was all name brand fabric. Kind of what had happened is, like, maybe there was an oil spot in the bolt of fabric, so they cut out the oil spot, and then they had like a 4-yard piece of fabric left, and so then they would sell those as flat folds to the Elko store, and then the Elko store would sell them to customers like me. It's my last piece, guys. We're really doing this. I'm so excited that we're going to be done. It looks like I can get another 1.5 inch piece off this one, I think. That's my goal anyway. After I do this, I am off. I bought some tulip bulbs off the clearance rack at Walmart, and it's a beautiful blustery day. I'm not even gonna have to wear a coat, and I'm gonna go out and plant my tulip bulbs. I'm putting in just a massive amounts of them because they were on such a good sale. They were only $3 a bag, and I think I bought 6 bags, so I'm gonna have like a gob of tulips. And so this is my 1.5 inch piece here, and so this is what I ended up with. Please remember that part of the this I had already cut before I came online and talked with you. And so here I'll show you what I have. This is my stack of 2.5 inch pieces that's going to go into my scrap bin. And so that's probably more than a jelly roll's worth, maybe even 2 jelly rolls worth. But you know, the pieces are all different lengths and all different colors, and they're not pre-coordinated, but that's part of the fun of quilting, is for me is to coordinate them myself. This is a stack of 1.5 inch pieces, and this whole bucket is full of 2.5 inch pieces. And if you stay tuned for another YouTube video, I plan on showing you how I'm making my hourglass blocks, and for that we'll be using these 2 inch pieces. And this down here is just the stuff that's going to go in my crumb bucket. And I have only one piece that's a 3.5 inch piece, and I have one piece that's a 2 1/4 inch piece that will go into my binding bin, so that if I'm making a scrappy binding, that will go in with that because it's a leftover binding piece. I'm really glad you were able to join me today. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for making me stay here and actually getting this all trimmed up and ready to go into a quilt. I'll probably do another video at some point, maybe showing you just a speed up version of me cutting, and I'll probably tackle my batik strips for that. It was fun having you here in my kitchen today, and I hope you join me again for another video. And you can always find me on my blog, joescountryjunction.com.